welcome everybody. Looks like we have a few members of the public here. Just a couple of quick protocol things. I assume everybody's very familiar with Zoom at this point, but if you can just stay muted for right now while Ethan's giving his presentation, just so we don't get a lot of background noise and feedback. And you're welcome to have your video on or off, whatever you prefer. And with that, I guess I'll introduce Ethan, who's our Chittenden County Forester. And Ethan has been doing a lot of work here in Hinesburg, along with some other partners that I'm sure he'll introduce to us all to, working on floodplain restoration and looking at different techniques to improve and research floodplain restoration. So with that, Ethan, feel free to take it away.
Sure. Hi. So nice to see some familiar faces and names here. My name is Ethan Tapper. I'm the Chittenden County Forester. I work for the Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. And I've been really enjoying working in the town of Hinesburg a whole lot, working with people like Pat Maynor, who's on the call, and who's the chair of the Hinesburg Town Forest Committee. And I know that she has to get off this in 15 minutes and go jump on that meeting. For county foresters, working with town forests is actually a pretty small part of our job. I think it's about 10 to 15% of the work that I do, but it's really exciting and it's a chance to do really good demonstration work and network with communities and get some cool projects done. And so this project is really neat, and a lot of it is just not all stuff that I've done, but stuff that I've done with the help of Pat and the others on the Hinesburg Town Forest Committee, and also some really cool partners who got interested in the project. So I'm just going to share my screen, and I have a new computer, and I'm going to hope this is going to go smoothly. You guys all see that? My PowerPoint there?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So this is a multi-partner project. So as you probably know, Hinesburg has two town forests. They have what we call the Hinesburg Town Forest, or the Old Town Forest, which is about 864 acres up in the Green Mountains, and more down in the valley here, near the center of town, is the LaPlatte Headwaters Town Forest. And so this is really a multi-partner restoration project that just started. It started when the property was acquired back in 2007. With the help of Andrea and Pat and others in here. And I wasn't here then, so sorry if I'm leaving you guys out if you were really involved in that project as well. But there's a lot of partners who are now recently coming on board for this as well. So in the LaPlatte Headwaters Town Forest, it's about 301 acres, of which about half are open. It was purchased by Hinesburg in 2007 with help from Trust for Public Land, Vermont Fish and Wildlife, Hinesburg Land Trust, and others. And again, I wasn't there, so I know that there was a lot of people who were involved in this process. So sorry if I left anybody out. Protected with a conservation easement, and it's managed on a day-to-day basis by the Hinesburg Town Forest Committee. About 130 acres of the LaPlatte Headwaters Town Forest is these historic floodplains and wetlands around the headwaters of the Platte River, what we call the riparian parcel sometimes, which is in the north of the property. So this stretch of the river, it's been straightened, it's been ditched, it's been drained for, probably hundreds of years, heavily altered. And the adjacent lands have been converted into agricultural lands, most recently hayfield and pasture, and planted specifically with a species called reed canary grass, which, if you haven't dealt with it, is a very virulent species of grass. I'll talk about a little bit later. When the property was acquired in 2007, there were some NRCS contracts that allowed the town to do some tree planting, some ditch plugging, to try and help this area revegetate, and also to try and help it restore hydrologically, which is one of the goals that we have for this portion of the property, is that the hydrology of this portion of the Platte River is restored, and that we can restore native vegetation, natural communities around it. In this area, some of the barriers to that restoration are obviously its land use history, the fact that it was managed as a hayfield for so long, the fact that it was planted with this really intense invasive grass, Locally high deer populations up and down the LaPlatte River are a problem. And you'll see that some of those trees that were planted in 2007 and 2010 are like little bonsai trees because they just get browsed and browsed and browsed, and a lot of them have been browsed to death. So the overall goal for this portion of the property, again, is to restore native natural communities around the LaPlatte River and to restore that hydrology with the idea that that would benefit both terrestrial and invasive wildlife, and that it would improve water quality going down the LaPlatte River and into Shelburne Bay. So it's pretty stark. Over 70% of the historic floodplain forest has been cleared across the Champlain Valley. And so that obviously has implications for, cascading implications that impact the water quality in Lake Champlain and the water quality that we enjoy as communities in the Champlain Valley. And also has really intense impacts on wildlife habitat, both terrestrial wildlife habitat, wildlife that live on land, but use these aquatic natural and wetland natural communities, and also for those that live in the water. So this project, the way that we've approached this project at the LaPlatte Headwaters Town Forest, I sort of broke it up into 3 different parts. And depending on what you all are interested in, I think I'm gonna try and talk about this for about 30 minutes, which is gonna be heavily abridged because there's a lot to each one of these parts, especially part 2, I think. And so we'll have another 15 minutes or so for me to try to answer your questions afterwards. So the part that I've been the most involved in is dealing with invasives in the woods. So woody invasive plants that are in the 150-ish wooded acres of the LaPlatte Headwaters Town Forest. So this is not a picture from the LaPlatte Headwaters Town Forest. This is just a picture of a bunch of barberry grown in the woods. Shrub, honeysuckle, common buckthorn, and Japanese barberry were present throughout a bunch of different of the wooded portions in the south of the LaPlatte Headwaters Town Forest. They were especially concentrated in the far south. That's where there was a big blowdown event, I believe in 2012. And in addition to a bunch of native regeneration that's coming along nicely, there's a lot of buckthorn, honeysuckle, and other stuff. And then scattered populations throughout the property. We know that invasive plants are a threat to the health of our communities generally, their resilience. We know that they generally threaten our wildlife habitat. And in threatening the resilience of our forests, we think that they also threaten the long-term water quality of our forests that our forests are providing and supporting. And so in general, by supporting healthy forests, we're going to be supporting more resilient watersheds that have better wildlife habitat and are improving water quality downstream. So we started dealing with this when 2 years ago in the winter of 2018-2019, we started doing a forest management project at the Hinesburg Town Forest, the old town forest. One of the things that project did is it generated a little bit of revenue, and that revenue was then turned around and put into, in part, invasive treatment at the LaPlatte Headwaters Town Forest. So we put out an RFP and we hired a contractor who came in and treated these invasive plants. This recent forestry graduate from UVM named Will Dunkley, Trout Lily Forestry Services. And then that forest management went on for 2 winters, so it just finished up last winter. And this summer we did an additional round of treatment. And as of right now, we have successfully controlled most invasive plant populations. There's still invasives around, and there will be, and we will address them as they come up. But we've addressed most of the plants that were there 2 years ago. So this is just a map that I've made of the forested portions of the LaPlatte Headwaters Town Forest. These areas in green around here in what we call Bissonnet Meadow, on the edges of the meadow, and down here in the south, in the area that we had a big blowdown in from 2012, 2013. Those are the areas that Will worked in 2 years ago, or last year. And then these areas in pink will address just this most recent summer, and that included getting some agreement from neighbors to address some of these field edge buckthorn and honeysuckle that were contributing a seed source. Okay, so that was most of the work that I do as a forester is with those woody invasive plants. So honeysuckle, buckthorn, Japanese barberry especially, also bittersweet and a whole multiflora rose and a whole host of others. So the second part was thinking about the restoration of some of these northern areas that are just not naturally revegetating into anything but reed canary grass, and thinking about, okay, how can we kickstart these areas? So I got some funding for a couple of years. I want to say 2017, 2018, we got some funding from the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps and from their watershed program, and with the help of the Winooski Natural Resource Conservation District to get trees and get them planted. And we planted them where we could with sort of mixed success, but we weren't really addressing the problem. We were just sort of throwing some trees at it. And so I don't remember when this happened, but my buddy, Annalise Carrington, happens to be a really amazing wildlife biologist for U.S. Fish and Wildlife's Partners in Fish and Wildlife program. And we were just like chatting about it. And she mentioned that there was some experimental treatments of reed canary grass that she wanted to do. And so in this this is about a 30-acre field. This was an area that is almost pure reed canary grass. And this is the area that we chose to sort of let her loose to sort of experiment and figure out how to address this reed canary problem. This is a problem that it's not unique to LaPlatte Headwaters Town Forest. It's actually really common and is a major restoration challenge. So this is the front of her slideshow. Annalise and I, and also Gus Goodman from the Nature Conservancy, did a presentation together. Oh, I don't know, I think it was in September, about this project. And this was the cover sheet from her presentation: an innovative approach to floodplain forest restoration, site preparation, and direct seeding trials at the LaPlatte Headwaters Town Forest in Hinesburg, Vermont. And this project had support from Annalise's employer. She's a joint employee of the Intervale Center in Burlington and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Vermont Fish and Wildlife, and then also the Nature Conservancy. So the problem is reed canary grass. Reed canary grass, it is an introduced species that was planted and apparently is still planted sometimes as a forage species. And it just is really resilient and doesn't die. It forms these very dense patches where the above ground biomass is so thick that nothing can grow through it. When it dies, it goes on the ground and forms this thick thatch that nothing can seed through. And then under the ground, it forms this thick root mat that nothing can root through. And so it's pretty resilient. I guess like almost nothing can kill it. And it can like be flooded for years and still live. It's pretty amazing, like a lot of these invasive plants. And so when the first time that I was thinking about doing it, I can't remember who I talked to. I think it was Pete Emerson, who is Annalise's partner. He works for Fish and Wildlife on this project. And Pete said, okay, my first recommendation would be convert those fields into conventional corn. And let them be cornfields and be plowed and harrowed and herbicided for a number of years, and then let them go. That was his best idea at killing the reed canary grass. That's how bad it is. But something that's really interesting is that they've noticed, researchers have noticed that floodplain trees and shrubs will establish much better on cropland like that than they will on former pasture and hay fields. And that's especially true for reed canary grass because those pastures are just so resistant to anything else besides reed canary grass establishing. And so Annalise's question was, can we replicate this condition, the condition of a cornfield to restore floodplain forests? And the idea was that it's an area-based approach rather than an individual tree-based approach. So a lot of people are restoring riparian areas and wetlands by planting individual trees. And it's expensive and it's hard to do, and there's all these other problems with it. They get eaten by deer and they get shocked and all this other stuff. But this idea would be, instead of trying to grow individual trees, you're like trying to grow a forest. And so you're preparing a whole area basically for the same thing that we expect when we have forest regeneration, which is tens of thousands of seedlings to the acre. And in a forest that will be generally more diverse and more resilient, and more resistant to some of those stressors that threaten when you're planting individual trees. This is really appealing to me because I always said, as a forester, the idea of like planting an individual tree like in your yard and trying to keep it alive just like stresses me out, because I'm so used to just like creating opportunities, right, where you're creating an opening in the forest and you expect this incredible abundance of native regeneration to come in. The idea of just like keeping one tree alive is, I'm like, oh man, don't want to do that. So this is definitely, I thought this was a really appealing idea, and we brought it to the town, Pat and the town forest committee, and they were into it. And so in summer 2019, Annalise, this project is all funded by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Didn't cost the town a nickel. They hired out someone to hay the field. So that's the first step. You got to hay it to get that thatch off, and then plow it in the case of certain treatments of this, and harrow it, and generally try and basically make it into a crop field, which is challenging. If you guys know that area, it's pretty wet. So turning that picture on the left of Reed canary grass into something like the picture on the right, which is, I believe that is a picture taken from LaPlatte Headwaters Town Forest. And so this is not just an approach that's designed to restore this area. This is an approach that's designed to inform future restoration efforts elsewhere that are dealing with a similar problem. And so there's a number of different treatments and replicates. There's a haying plus herbicide, haying and plowing only, no herbicide, hay plus plowing plus herbicide. And then in addition to that, there's a number of different treatments related to how they're applying or not applying seed, which is another whole interesting part of this project. Annalise is sort of inventing, and Pete Emerson, the guy who works for Vermont Fish and Wildlife, who she works with, is sort of inventing a number of techniques and adapting techniques from other parts of the country for collecting and dispersing floodplain plant species. And so this involves, these are pictures of willows. She's also using it with cottonwood. I know that she spent a lot of time with silver maple. This is silver maple. And basically just trying to figure out really efficient ways to collect, store, and then disperse these seeds. And it's pretty cool. Annalise said she literally like went out in Burlington when it's like cottonwood season out there, and just was collecting like trash bags of cottonwood fluff, and raking up silver maple seeds and all of this really interesting stuff. And again, this is a really innovative approach, because she's, in her research about this, she's realized that she's sort of inventing a lot of these strategies. And they're using innovative tools. So they're using broadcast seeding, so just literally tossing them out. They're using hydro seeders, like people use in landscaping. That's them putting, I believe, some cottonwood fluff into a hydro seeder. And they're using direct seeding. So they've like planted acorns individually in one of the treatment areas. So this was from last year. So this was from June. Because of COVID and because of the dry spring, the first year that they were doing this direct seeding was not very successful. And they know basically what went wrong, and they've got funding to continue. So they didn't have a great year last year, but they've actually prepped some more areas for next year, and re-prep those additional areas to see what happens. In general, they found that haying and plowing alone, so what we might call a mechanical treatment, was not effective at all. And Annalise said, I think that I talked to Annalise on the phone earlier, and she said, yeah, just it doesn't work at all for controlling reed canary grass. Hay plus plow plus herbicide works. Hay plus herbicide works. And both of them, you know, we're sort of still watching them develop and seeing what sort of communities establish. One of the interesting things, so here's some, on the left, you see the areas that were hayed and plowed, but not herbicided. On the right, one of those herbicided plots. One of the big surprises was that there were actually some really cool herbaceous plant communities, pollinator communities that came into some of those areas that were unexpected. So even when the direct seeding of those tree seeds failed, you know, due to a bunch of different stuff, but among them late seeding and dry spring, we still got something that was really interesting. So, and better than reed canary grass, you know, in terms of recruiting all these native species and having pollinator benefits and other wildlife benefits. So that was kind of interesting. So regardless, we've prepped some more areas. Annalise has prepped some more areas, re-prepped those areas that were not successful from this last year, and then made some more areas. And actually, she's going to try in the original areas. She's going to continue with spring seeding of species that seed in the spring, and in these fall areas, they did some fall seeding this year of fall seeding floodplain tree species. So they're trying sort of a number of different approaches. So the second part is the Nature Conservancy's part. And I think they were actually sort of on board before U.S. Fish and Wildlife was on board. I talked to Rose Paul at the Nature Conservancy before she left, wondering if this could be a candidate for their American elm restoration program. And, you know, just trying to sort of think of clever ideas. And we ended up sort of, we've gotten really close. We've gotten approved for funding. We haven't, not a whole lot has actually happened out there, but there's a lot that's planned for next year with the Nature Conservancy. So up here in the north, this is Annalise's field. Only about 5 acres of that 30-acre field are actually in Annalise's trials. So there's still a big chunk of it that has yet to be restored. The Nature Conservancy mapped out 13 acres, which are all these areas in yellow here. So, which are scattered among, you know, patches of reed canary grass and other issues. So to give you a sense of what an obstacle reed canary grass is, the Nature Conservancy's, how they evaluated it was, they said if an area was densely infested with reed canary grass, don't even bother. They weren't even going to try to do restoration there. So that was part of what they were considering, in addition to hydrology and microtopography and some other really cool stuff that they checked out. That's how they identified these 13 acres. And they gave us a lot of funding, or they gave Gus Goodwin and Dan Farrell, who was in that last picture, the local TNC folks who are actually administering this part of the project, they gave them like $65,000 to do this. So it's a significant investment in 13 acres of floodplain forest here in Hinesburg. They've networked with a bunch of undergrads and also graduate students at UVM to get a lot more information about the floodplains out there that look like, you know, just like an old field, but are actually much more complex. In the eyes of ecologists, you always find out so much more diversity and intricacies about these places, and, you know, sort of map them into these little natural communities. So many different natural communities where I would be like, it's a field, you know. It's really fascinating all the work that they've done, the due diligence that they've done on the area that they're going to be working on. So to date, what they did is last year they had installed some deer exclosures. They're going to be doing basically deer exclosure installations and cluster planting. So planting within deer exclosures. They've seen really extensive mortality on other plantings from deer browse. And so they're really into protecting their seedlings from deer browse, especially when they walk around LaPlatte and they see all the deer sign and what deer have done to the other trees that have been planted there. A really interesting part of this project, so they're going to plant 200, what did I figure it out? It was 200 stems per acre times 13 acres, which is, they're going to plant like 2,500 trees. And a fair amount of those are going to be disease-resistant American elms that they've bred. So a big goal of their American Elm Restoration Project is to restore American elms, not just to our yards and our streets, but into our natural communities. And so that's a really, really exciting and cool part of the project. And they will be planting those next spring, I believe. At least, I don't know. It will depend, I think, how much they plant all at once versus staggering it over time. But they've got that funding, and so it'll be cool to also see the differences between the work that Annalise is doing and how that stewards along, sort of a fledgling natural community versus the work that the Nature Conservancy is doing, which is certainly, at least in terms of planting individual trees, sort of more of a traditional approach, but is also applied differently. So doing stuff like clustering those plantings, protecting them with deer fence, and stuff like that. Okay, so with that, there's a lot more to all of those different things. With that, I'll stop sharing my screen. And I guess what I just want to highlight is that's so neat about this project is I really see this as sort of a it's a very holistic approach to a complex problem. So it's cool because it's utilizing partnerships. It's neat because it's allowing the town to sort of use its natural resources, not just to be a better resource to the town by improving water quality and wildlife habitat and all these other things, but also to inform better management of our forests and better restoration of our floodplains going forward, which I think is such a cool part of it. And that it's being sort of, that the way that we're thinking about this entire project, from the woods to riparian areas and wetland areas, which are usually sort of, at least in our conservation community, those are sort of two different silos, like riparian restoration and forest management. We're really seeing them as part of the same thing, because we know that healthy, resilient forests are going to contribute more positively to water quality and aquatic habitat, and also terrestrial wildlife habitat. And so thinking about those things together. And then finally, I think it's really special that the funds, a lot of these funds have just been given to us by partners, but that the funds to fund the invasive control in the woods, what came from Hinesburg's other town forest, which I think is really, really neat, that we were able to do a project at the Hinesburg Town Forest, the old town forest, that I think as a standalone project was really important, and continues to be, educating people about forest management and showcasing what a special resource Hinesburg has in its town forest. And then in addition was able to fund this really cool project at LaPlatte Headwaters Town Forest. So what do you think, Kate? How you want to take questions?
Yeah, I mean, we have about 20 people on. I think people could certainly just unmute themselves and ask a question.
Sure.
Unless you feel otherwise, I'm happy to read them off the chat if you prefer.
No, whatever's good.
Okay. So if you have a question for Ethan, just feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. Looks
like Marty's got one.
Ethan, this is really a complex situation. So, we've been doing a lot of invasive stuff, largely more aquatic, some terrestrial, but largely aquatic. And the one thing, and we use TNC to help us out too. And one of the things that, we've been trying to keep up with is to start with the management plan, and whatever the heck you end up concluding here, it gets put into the record of the management plan. And like, you have a recommended BMP. At the outset, you go in there and you try it, and then you make conclusions, and then you make recommendations for the next round of management. Are you guys doing that with a budget attached to it as well? This is what we kind of want to know in terms of learning from you at this site. Is this $1 million project for 100 acres, or what is it?
Yeah,
so
I mean,
get some sense.
Yeah, certainly. So certainly we have a clear idea. I could have Annalise run the numbers as well, and we will, for those, the projects, the part of it that's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Annalise's project, the trials, and then for TNC's project, we know what the budget of that is. I could send it to you. It's like $63,000 something. But yeah, I think the idea, And one of the things that's neat about partnering with those organizations, rather than just them giving us the money to do the project, is that they're also committed to monitoring. So that's not something that we have to take on. Monitoring is really hard, and we should always be doing more of it, but it's a hard thing to take on as a community, you know, with volunteers, and I certainly can't do all of it. So that's definitely a part of, you know, obviously Annalise is doing that in a much more intense way, because they're trying to make it a publishable scientific approach to those different treatments. And the TNC is doing it more to inform the types of management that they're doing going forward.
So you know, what I want to say is that this is the town forest, and Pat and crew are managing the town forest.
Mm-hmm.
And so they need a management plan to go by and advocate for a budget locally and all that stuff. So, you know, whether TNC's got a little hand in this or whomever, the town needs to have a management plan that they subscribe to and promote and educate with. And hopefully this project can be transferable to other locations with similar community types, you know, all that. I mean, we can't take just what you shared with us today and transfer that. So, you know, I'm hoping to be able to use what you have learned and transfer it to other locations.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I think what's important and what's hard to transfer is that this is a research project. And so how to break out the budget for what part of it is research, and then can we analyze it so that the next time it happens, or when you want to put into practice what they've learned, it's a realistic budget. Because certainly trying to do, you know, I think this may end up being, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars. You know, it's great. I mean, there is a management plan. I would put a plug in for the fact that the management plan is there because it was a condition of the easement. So there is a management plan that recognized that research would be a wonderful thing to have happen on here, but that was not the goal of the town forest, for it to be a research project. But we really were hoping that this kind of thing would happen and it would be documented.
Yeah, and I think that's the goal. I know that certainly with Annalise's I mean, I think that project, the work that Annalise is doing with the site preparation, thinking about restoration, riparian restoration in a completely different way, and then all the seeding stuff that she's figuring out, I think that's going to change the world. I mean, I think that is such a interesting and completely new and exciting way of doing it. And I know that her interest is, you know, she doesn't have any results yet, really, except for sort of anecdotal initial stuff. But I think her idea is to get the formulas and the options she figures out into the hands of practitioners to get it done.
Hey, Ethan, I have a follow-up question. I'm also an Ethan, so
Hey, Ethan.
Ethan's. So, I have two questions. They're completely unrelated, but one is I find that the approach that was taken in trying to do hydro seeding of native seed stock is very compelling. I know that I believe Pete and some of his folks have been looking at trying to do some riparian restoration work, you know, taking that type of approach, which I think is really, you know, that's great stuff. I just wonder if there's an plan to attempt to do that again on any of those parcels there in another season where the timing might be better, the seasonality of doing that might be better.
Yeah, I think that they just did a bunch of fall seeding, and that was normal broadcasting. I think they just broadcast them by hand, but then next spring they're going to do the hydro seeding again, and hope that by doing it, you know, because again, June 2020, I think that was the earliest they could get out, because everything was completely shut down before then. But what they really want to get out there, I think, is in April, and try it again in April, and hope that we don't have a really, really dry spring again. But yeah, their plan is to try that again. I think the hydro seeding is really Pete's Pete's really excited about it.
Yeah. And I have one other question, and don't want to monopolize the time here, but I know that in past years we looked at the Headwaters Town Forest and could see that there was a fair amount of gully erosion going on up there. I think it's very silty, loamy, type of soil. And I know we had talked at the time, I think, with some of the folks that we were looking at that issue with Kristen Underwood, some other folks, but just this idea of trying to do more like large woody debris, stabilization with some of those stream channels and where the stream was head cutting. And I haven't even been back there in a while. I'm embarrassed to say, but just wondered if any of that was ever attempted.
No, I mean there was the whole tire, the tire thing, which I think was analyzed, and they decided they told them to leave those tires there. That was the best thing for that particular gully. But that was mentioned. One of the invasive control contractors, Bob Hyams, who lives in Hinesburg, he also mentioned he's really into coarse woody addition and stuff like that. And so he mentioned that he thought it'd be a good idea. We haven't really discussed it. I'm sort of approaching it in a very general way, which is like just trying to grow healthier forests and hoping that will trickle down to, all of those other processes. But we haven't really talked about actively adding wood or putting more woody debris on the ground or anything like that.
But the beavers have come in, and that they were there. Unfortunately, they did have to get trapped out or removed because they were backing up into somebody's cellar. But I think the beavers can really add a lot. And I think what's interesting is that, in the beginning of this project, when we were talking about restoration, was the berming that's happened along the LaPlatte and the kind of regulatory morass that you might get into having to deal with Army Corps in terms of trying to allow there to be better access to the floodplain. This was like 2007, and we couldn't just put the berms back in. So we could plug the ditches, but that would add a whole different dimension to it if really the LaPlatte had more access on a regular basis to its floodplain.
So can I say something about that?
I didn't notice you were on the call, Bob.
Yeah. Thanks, Ethan. Thanks for the report.
Nice hearing you, Bob.
Thank you. So so I've been working on some of these projects with Vermont Land Trust. Adding wood to actual stream channels. To sort of jumpstart stream evolution processes, and then also for gully repair, taking available wood, we're sort of combining it with invasive plant control. So we're cutting the buckthorn and we're harvesting the buckthorn and we're repurposing it for gully remediation and stream channel work. So we're trying to get to the point where it's an accepted practice, in a sort of in a riparian corridor, in the same sense that riparian plantings have become an accepted practice that doesn't have to. So to Andrew's point, we don't have to jump through a bunch of regulatory hoops. So, we're making progress. We're getting there.
Cool. Ethan, I can share with you that Trout Unlimited is calling LCA and wanting to do a riparian thing down at the Route 7 area at the Hinsdale floodplain, a really big floodplain, a very wide floodplain, I should say. And they want to use Pete Emerson, and it's going to be super interesting. It will be a fun place. Maybe Hyams can come in and help out, because it is an active beaver area as well.
Yeah, it's I was gonna say call Bob. Pete's, they're doing a couple, there's a few other, I think there's another site in Rygate, and And the original sites where this work with reed canary grass specifically was started was with Pete in Willoughby, WMA, which is up in the Kingdom.
Gotcha.
And that's where he figured out, some of the base. He sort of did a very small scale version of this, and he figured out sort of the basic idea. And that's where he figured out stuff like if you don't hay the field with reed canary grass, like there's no point. If the thatch is too thick, nothing will happen. And so there were some basic assumptions that had already been determined that informed the work that Annalise did out there. It wasn't just all completely out of the ether. So yeah, and so I think they're trying to make more sites come online. And then the idea is, again, it's not just so we can, just research for the sake of research. It's like so that we can actually now do this and we can do repair and restoration more efficiently and better.
It sure is grim news that you have to plow and apply herbicide.
I know.
That
Yeah,
sounds
not ideal, but
no. Not at all optimal.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, the way that I think about it, I guess, is that, these are completely human created problems, and there's an opportunity to use some of the tools that we have to fix them. And so it's, I think it's a compromise that I'm willing to make, certainly, to have healthy riparian communities. And the other thing that I would say that we didn't get really a chance to talk about a lot either is specifically on the LaPlatte River. I think deer are a really significant barrier to restoration. I know that the Nature Conservancy did a deer population study at the LaPlatte River Marsh, which is just down the river in Shelburne.
Yeah.
And they determined that there were 32 deer per square mile there. The recommendation, where we're targeting with populations is closer to 20, so 50% higher. At Shelburne Farms, they did a spotlight study and found that they had 40 deer per square mile, which is the highest number documented anywhere in the state, probably in the last 40 years.
What should it be?
20.
20, okay.
And places south of us, deer populations can get over 100, 200 deer per square mile. And that's where stuff like scary words like ecosystem disintegration and stuff like that happens. Which is, where it's really a big deal. And over 40 per square mile is when like recreational hunting is no longer effective, according to our research. And so, that's when you start to have culls, depredation, snipers and stuff like that. So I think that, there's a lot of things that woody invasives are involved. Invasives like reed canary grass are involved. Human created hydrology, ditching and straightening and all this other stuff is involved. But it's all sort of part of this bigger picture of how we restore our floodplains, and have better water quality and better aquatic habitat. Deer are definitely a part of it that I'm a little bit freaked out about at this point.
Yeah, it might be. It's noteworthy that the southern states, which are, I think, have higher deer densities, they're hunting. They let you go out for the smaller guys, and Vermont, being up in the northern, more forested, we go for the does, and down in the southern states, they go for the younger guys.
They did just in recognition of this, which was pretty cool. Vermont Fish and Wildlife just changed the rules this year, so basically incentivize the lowering of the population. And I think those new rules are great. And also we had a lot more hunters this year, more outdoor everything this year because COVID. But yeah, hunting was definitely more popular this year, and I think those rules are going to be a big improvement in terms of lowering the population in areas where it's too high. There aren't overpopulated everywhere, but in the Champlain Valley, and in this particular part of the Champlain Valley, they appear to be quite overpopulated.
Yes.
Right, and I think it's really important to tie that to kind of the fragmentation and the way in which we've allowed residential land use to expand, and the kind of the demographics and all of that. It's so tied together, and for people to understand that the degradation that it does to natural forest regeneration. You know, just people, you can't point that out enough. That it's about losing the diversity and the age composition in our forests because of the overbrowsing. And it appears like it's this beautiful forest when people drive around, and it's 10-acre zoning that has, and 5-acre zoning that's made this happen.
Yeah, certainly. And with a lot of this stuff, you know, you don't have to, like, we don't have to imagine what it would be like if deer became really, really overpopulated. Now they're just a little bit overpopulated. If it became really overpopulated, or, you know, if our, you know, forest became more fragmented, or if our invasive species problems were left to go unchecked for, you know, much longer and became much worse, because all you got to do is go south, right? Like, all you got to do is go to these other areas where you go to Massachusetts, and, you know, go and keep on going south, and you'll see these areas where deer have a very just sort of far-reaching and scary impact on our ecosystems. Invasive, same thing. Fragmentation, same thing. And with deer, you know, they tend to be a winner in a fragmentation scenario, both by limiting the areas that are huntable, so that our sort of remaining apex predator, which is people, can take them and lower that population sort of manually, and also because they tend to be resilient to fragmentation, so they're not bothered by it in the way that some of our other species like bear are.
So Ethan, when you started to think about the LaPlatte Headwater Forest area, did you start from, say, the center of the most forested area and come out to the edge in your recon and sort of strategy for attacking invasives, or what was your approach? And, you know, what's your management recommendation for that?
For invasives in the woods?
Yes. And
Yeah,
versus
so,
in the field.
Yeah, so in my recon, I didn't, you know, I just walked through the woods, you know. I didn't approach it in any way more specific than that, in looking at it at first. But in terms of how we prioritize the management that we do, what I tell people is usually find the biggest seed-bearing individuals and kill them first. And so those will often be on the edges, field edges, hedgerows, stuff like that. And that way you're at least lowering the new introductions of seed, right? So you're sort of like stopping the bleeding, and then move on to, you know, it depends on, some people would say that you should start in your interior forest where the invasive populations are lower, and then sort of work your way out to that edge. Or some people would say start at the edge and work your way into the interior of the forest. I think it depends on the species. But in this case, we basically just knew that we had specific populations and that we wanted to, like, take them out. And so we figured out where they were. We started, you know, where they were sort of the most obvious, which is in that blowdown area in the south, along the edge of Bissonnet Meadow. So those were those field edge seed-bearing ones. And then I did some more recon and found some other spot populations, and then we addressed those. So
is your interior forest pretty well intact then now?
Yeah, it's pretty well invasive free. Yeah, I mean, they're pretty insidious, so there's still little populations that we're always going to have to be addressing, but we got most of them for sure.
That's terrific. So volunteers could handle the rest.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Ethan. I think we'll try to leave it there in the, you know, sense of trying to keep us on time tonight. And just to remind everybody, we are going to have another presentation next month. We're going to have David Brin from Vermont Family Forests at our meeting. That's on February 11th, probably the same time, but I will send out another Front Porch Forum post as well. Yeah, go ahead, Ethan.
Just so one more plug is that, so we did an event, which was a little bit longer, about this project. Yeah. And in September, it was a virtual event, and we recorded it. And Annalise herself and Gus Goodwin from the Nature Conservancy are on it, and it's on my YouTube channel. So you can just if you go on YouTube and you search for Chittenden County Forester, there'll be a recording of it on there. if you want to, and
Great.
feel free to, if anybody has more questions, you can just also email me.
And can we link it to the LCA site? Or-
Yeah.
Yeah, Andrea, I'll put this on our YouTube page and I'll put it on our website as well, and we can
And
send
it
it
certainly
out.
should be on the town website.
Sure. Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
And if anyone is on the call and isn't on our, we do have a monthly newsletter as well that goes out that will probably have reminders of our, any upcoming events. So feel free to sign up for that on our website if you are interested.
Thanks for having me, everybody.
Oh, nice to see
Yeah,
you,
thank
Ethan.
you, Ethan.